Let's go back in time to the 1980s. Think of the movies that defined that era.
Get away from her, you bitch!
I am your father.
Now think of the people who made those movies. Some of these guys are just as iconic now as they were back then, like Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese. There are some other guys you could name as well. Here's one that I think you have never heard of, John Landis. I doubt many of you know who he is. He hasn't directed a movie since 2009. But looking at his filmography, I'm sure you have seen a few of these movies. He even directed maybe the greatest music video ever. There is no denying that he is one of the most successful directors of his era. However, it's not without one giant taint, maybe one of the worst disasters in movie history. Meet John Landis. At one point he was one of the top directors in Hollywood, to now someone most people couldn't even name. John Landis' origins began when he was 18 when he dropped out of high school. He worked in the mailroom at 20th Century Fox. He then worked as a production assistant for the Yugoslavian film Kelly's Heroes. After that, he worked as a stuntman in spaghetti westerns, including the classic Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. At age 21, Landis directed his first film, a monster film called Schlock. The makeup was designed by Rick Baker, who would go on to have an amazing career as a makeup artist and special effects, including 7 Oscars for his work. Another important person in the film was editor George Fossley Jr., who would work both as an editor and producing partner for Landis. However, Landis had trouble finding a distributor for the movie. The movie would find the attention of TV host Johnny Carson, who loved the film. Because of that, the movie was able to gain a distributor and was released in 1973. Landis' next project would be a massive step up. Landis was hired by Eon Productions to write a screenplay for the next James Bond movie. His script involved James Bond trying to save the Pope from a kidnapping in Latin America. Producer Albert Broccoli was not a fan of the satirization of the Catholic Church, considering Landis was an atheist. He was removed from the project. However, when one door closes, another one opens. For Landis, it would be a script written by Jim Abrams and brothers Jerry and David Zucker. The movie was called The Kentucky Fried Movie. The movie was a series of sketches woven together into one movie.
Take him to Detroit. No! No, not Detroit! No! No, please! Anything with that! No!
The movie was successful when released in 1977. It launched the career of the 3 writers to make successful comedies. But also for Landis, it was his breakout film. Landis' next project would be another comedy, National Lampoon's Animal House. Inspired by the comedic magazine, it would be the film debut of SNL member John Belushi. While the movie received mixed reviews at the time, it would go on to become a comedy classic.
See if you can guess what I am now. I'm a zit. Get it?
It would be the 3rd highest grossing movie in 1978. Landis had gone from mail clerk to now one of the rising directors in Hollywood. Landis would collaborate with Belushi again in 1980 with the Blues Brothers, along with another SNL cast member in Dan Aykroyd. During filming, Landis and Belushi would have many conflicts. It even included when Landis walked in on Belushi's trailer in what he described as a mountain of cocaine on a table. Landis and Belushi would clash on set. The Blues Brothers was released in 1980 and was a commercial success, with Landis now definitely the top comedy director in Hollywood. Unfortunately for John Belushi, he would never overcome his addiction. He died 2 years later at the age of 33. Landis' next project would be different from his last 2. It was a passion project that he had worked on for decades. The film was a horror comedy, An American Werewolf in London, released in 1981. The film would be successful critically and commercially. It is often considered the greatest werewolf movie. The makeup and special effects were heavily praised, especially the transformation scene, considered one of the greatest practical effects scenes ever. It was done by Rick Baker. He would take home the very first Academy Award for makeup and the first of 7 in what would be a legendary career.
John Landis said to me is that I'm never going to really show the werewolf for more than a couple seconds. And I hardly even want to show it then, you know.
Right.
And what was great about Werewolf, working on that film with John Landis, was he, you know, said, you're the expert. I want a 4-legged hound from hell. I wanted to make a biped werewolf. You know, we argued about it. And it was basically, you know, he wins. He's the director, you know. But he says, 4-legged hound from hell, make it. And I did. I mean, the first sculpture was what the final thing became. Same with everything in it, the Nazi demons, all that stuff. You know, cut to, you know, like when I did The Wolfman. I mean, it did thousands of designs, and you know, all these producers are going, well, maybe if you do one between this and that, and do one between this and that, and or maybe this pore should be over here, you know, and that kind of stuff just is so soul sucking, you know.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons I retired, you know. But to this day, I mean, like on the cover of my book is the sculpture from of one of the Nazi demons from American Werewolf. And a number of people said this is like one of the greatest designs ever, you know, and this kind of stuff. And it's people who are production designers and stuff. And it's pure Rick Baker without interference,
right.
You know, and that's what I thought the industry would be, you know.
Right.
One person who was a massive fan of An American Werewolf in London was a rising pop star named Michael Jackson. Jackson started out performing with his siblings in the Jackson 5 before starting a solo career. In November of 1982, he released his album Thriller. Today, it's the best-selling album of all time and considered to be one of the greatest. It featured many iconic songs such as Beat It and Billie Jean. One of the other iconic songs was called Thriller, a disco funk track about monsters that paid tribute to classic horror movies. It even featured a speaking sequence by veteran horror actor Vincent Price, who also did the song's iconic evil laugh at the end. After watching An American Werewolf in London, Jackson wanted Landis to direct a music video for Thriller. It was uncommon for commercial directors such as Landis to direct a music video. However, Landis saw it as an opportunity.
American Werewolf, when Michael came to John Landis to do Thriller, you know, he liked American Werewolf and he wanted to do, he wanted it to be a short film. He didn't want to call it a music video.
Mm-hmm.
And John contacted me and said, you know, Michael Jackson wants to do this American Werewolf like music video, you know, for the song Thriller, which I hadn't heard. And it was like, you know, Michael Jackson, little Michael Jackson, Jackson 5? Yeah, you know, he's not called that anymore, you know. And so he goes, John says, I'll send you a cassette and listen to it and get some ideas, you know. So
Instead, it was more of a short film that paid tribute to classic genres. Rick Baker was asked to do the makeup for Jackson's werecat transformation and Zombies. His wife, Deborah Noodleman, designed Jackson's iconic red suit in the video.
There's a time where music videos were a new thing, and then Thriller changed what a music video is. It was so huge. It was a world premiere event that was on MTV, and it's so hard for kids today to understand what that means. But we were all like gathered around the TV waiting for the Michael Jackson Thriller world premiere. And it premiered and it changed what a music video is.
Yeah. Then
all of a sudden it became this film. And it was really cool because, like, Michael Jackson was this sweet guy, and he's on a date with this beautiful girl, and the next thing you know, he's a werecat or whatever he was. Right. Was that supposed to be a cat? Like what?
Yeah, he wanted to be a werewolf, and I just thought, you know, I don't think he should be a werewolf, and I thought something feline would fit him better, you know. And I originally did a Black Panther, and then I was afraid of the Black Panther. You know, I didn't want him to be associated with the Black Panthers. You know what I mean?
The political part.
Yeah. So I then became more of fantasy. I gave it longer hair and like white streaks.
The Thriller music video would premiere in December of 1983. It's today considered to be the greatest music video ever, and it had a major influence on music videos entirely. Landis had 3 projects released in 1983, one of them being the Thriller music video. The other would be another comedy classic, Trading Places, a modern take on The Prince and the Pauper starring Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. It almost seemed like whatever Landis touched turned to gold and he could do no wrong. However, I mentioned he had one more project released in 1983. However, it would not only change his career and life, but it would go on to define him and almost taint everything he did. If whatever John Landis touched turned to gold, then whatever Steven Spielberg touched turned to diamonds. Spielberg rose to the top after directing Jaws in 1975, launching the summer blockbuster. He would follow that up with Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the final becoming the highest-grossing film of all time at the time. He and Landis got the chance to know each other and had become friends. Landis and Spielberg even made cameos in each other's movies. Landis' wife, Deborah Noodleman, was the costume designer for Raiders of the Lost Ark and designed Indiana Jones's now iconic costume. Both Spielberg and Landis were working on their next project, a movie adaptation of The Twilight Zone.
You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound. A dimension of sight. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone was a 1960s horror sci-fi anthology series hosted by Rod Serling. Spielberg pitched the idea of doing a movie adaptation of the series. The movie would be split into 4 different segments, each directed by a separate director. The first one would be directed by John Landis, the second by Steven Spielberg, the third by Joe Dante, who is best known for directing the Gremlins movies, and the fourth and final would be directed by George Miller, best known for the Mad Max movies. It was an ambitious project with 4 all-star directors to bring their talent to the big screen. The segment that John Landis was to direct was called Time Out. It would feature veteran actor Vic Morrow playing Bill Connor, a racist and anti-Semitic bigot who was transported back in time. Connor would have a redemptive arc in which he saves 2 Vietnamese children who were being fired at by an American helicopter. Landis and his crew got ready to shoot the scene, where they then ran into a problem. California labor laws prevented child actors from working at night. However, they were able to find a solution. Instead, they could cast non-union actors and pay them the minimum for an extra. The 2 children were chosen were Renee Sen-Yi and Micah Den Lee. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. However, producer Frank Marshall was hesitant, but Landis assured him that he would not use the children for any stunt shots. Fun fact about Frank Marshall, he is the wife of Kathleen Kennedy. Yes, that one. Frank Marshall and Kathleen Kennedy have also been longtime producing partners of Steven Spielberg movies. Early in the morning of July 23, 1982, Landis and the rest of the crew got ready to film a scene in which Vic Morrow would protect the 2 child actors from the helicopter being fired upon them. Vic Morrow was a veteran actor known for his westerns. He is also the father of actress Jennifer Jason Leigh. The helicopter used was a Bell UH-1. It was flown by Vietnam veteran Dorsey Wingo. Wingo would hover the helicopter over the child actors, while pyrotechnic explosions went off. However, Landis, who was now known as a control freak, demanded that Wingo fly lower. Wingo abided by Landis and flew lower. As he flew lower, one of the explosives hit the rear end of the helicopter, and it would end up crashing in the river where Morrow and the child actors were. Vic Morrow, Renee Sen-Yi, and Micah Den Lee were sadly killed from the helicopter crashing on them. Landis was in shock in what he had seen. 3 people were killed under unfortunate circumstances. It was a disaster beyond anything in film history. How could something like this have happened, and what could have been done to prevent it?
A helicopter crash near Magic Mountain today brought tragedy to the set of the Steven Spielberg movie, The Twilight Zone. Actor Vic Morrow and 2 small children were killed when the chopper came down as they were shooting a war scene.
Director John Landis and 4 associates taking center stage in a courtroom to face charges of involuntary manslaughter.
The Twilight Zone movie was released on June 24, 1983. The Time Out segment with Vic Morrow was still added using footage they had already filmed with Morrow. The footage of the accident was not used. It received mixed reviews from critics who believed it failed to live up to the show.
So, on balance, an okay movie, just barely okay.
I would say it's just barely not okay. I didn't like either one of the first 2 segments. John Landis' thing about racism, I thought, was very predictable. Yeah, I agree with you. Spielberg was the disappointing low point.
Amazing.
The 2 lesser-known directors, Joe Dante, who has that part where the traveler goes into the strange people in the roadside house,
kind of neat.
And then George Miller of The Road Warrior with the scene that we just saw. Those were good, but on the whole, I would say I couldn't recommend the movie.
Well, it's easy to wonder if the accident left a sour taste in many critics' mouth. Landis would show up to Vic Morrow's funeral despite not being invited. Landis tried to make peace by delivering an unsuccessful eulogy. Steven Spielberg was so disgusted by Landis and his actions that the 2 have not spoken to each other since the accident. Landis, producer George Fosley Jr., pilot Darcy Wingo, and explosion expert Paul Stewart were all charged with involuntary manslaughter.
If anyone had ever thought that such a horrendous thing could happen, obviously we would have stopped. And this is a terrible, terrible accident that obviously will cause pain and anguish to all of us for the rest of our lives.
Title of court and cause. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, John Landis, not guilty of involuntary manslaughter, as charged in count 1 of the amended information.
The trial would last for 10 months from 1986 to 1987. The five-power would be acquitted of the charges. They would end up settling with the families of the victims. Following the trial, new safety measures were introduced from filming to keep actors and crews safe. It's still not perfect, as fatal accidents in films such as The Crow and Rust have led to more measures being introduced. In the 1996 interview, Landis said this about the accident: "There is absolutely no good about this whole story. The tragedy which I think about every day had an enormous impact on my career from which I may possibly never recover." Still, Landis has defended himself for his role in the accident, arguing it was a freak accident that was no one's fault.
Serious car accident. Have you ever been in any situation where people are killed, whether it's a car accident or train accident or military encounter or something? Of course, it stays with you. And you learn a lot about fate and a lot about accidents. And that was what's very hard in The Twilight Zone, is to try not to become too cynical or bitter about, because so many people are happy to exploit tragedy. And you learn bitter lessons. I mean, you learn that people want to believe bad things, that it's more fun to believe that evil people went off and did this bad thing than there was an accident. You know, if there was an accident, it's not exciting. It has to be someone's fault. And then our legal system is set up so you have to find fault. Someone was at fault because something happened. And they'll make it up. I mean, that's the other thing that's interesting. I mean, so much about The Twilight Zone that's been written about and everything is untrue, because it's more fun to believe that.
It was a massive stain on Landis. However, there's the old saying that money talks. Landis was one of the top directors when the movie came out. Even with the trial going on, he was still directing movies. Despite the accident, Landis was still a top director. Michael Jackson's Thriller came out almost 18 months after the accident. During the trial, Landis would still direct movies. In 1985, he collaborated with Dan Aykroyd along with SNL actor Chevy Chase for the comedy Spies Like Us. He and Chase would team up again next year for The Three Amigos along with Steve Martin and Martin Short. Both movies received mixed to negative reviews from critics, but would end up becoming cult classics, The Three Amigos being one of my all-time favorite comedies.
I'm Lucky Dave. I'm Ned Niederlander. I'm Dusty Bottoms. So together we're the Three Amigos. Let's go!
I wonder if the reception was due to Landis being attached. Even after the trial, Landis would still get opportunities. Like I said, he had a good track record. Some were willing to look past it. Some, however, just wanted to give him a second chance. One of those was Eddie Murphy, who Landis had worked with on Trading Places. He wanted to give the director a second chance and chose him to direct his next movie, Coming to America. During production, Landis and Murphy feuded. Landis had earned the reputation of being a control freak and clashed with Murphy. Murphy was not afraid to bring up Landis' involvement in the accident.
I've known John for 14 years. You know, it's 1 week out of a relationship, and then there was a lot of press because the movie got sued, and we were fighting, and then you get microphones in your face, and you say something, and it just gets, you carry your baggage with you. That's the paradox, you know, being in this business. Any button that you press, people carry that with them forever. There's still people that bad and good things, you know. The people that come up to me from Saturday night, from things I did on Saturday Night Live, you know. It's, hey, and I haven't been that guy in 10 years, you know, and I haven't been a guy in Delirious in 8 years. And that fight with Landis was 6 years ago, you know. It's been over, but, you know, that's still on the table.
Landis and Murphy was feud throughout production. Coming to America was released in 1988. It was one of the highest-grossing films that year and would become another comedy classic under Landis. Murphy and Landis would eventually recounsel, and Landis would collaborate with Murphy again on Beverly Hills Cop 3 in 1994, but the film was not well received by audiences and critics. Murphy would express disappointment with the film. A new decade can mean many different things for someone. In 1991, Landis directed another comedy film called Oscar starring Sylvester Stallone. It received negative reviews from critics and was a box office flop. Stallone himself expressed regret over the project. The same year, he collaborated once again with Michael Jackson for the music video Black or White. It was fitting considering how much Jackson had changed since Landis and him last collaborated. The next year, Landis decided to take a shot at horror with Innocent Blood, but it turned out to be a massive flop. Following the failure of Beverly Hills Cop 3 in 1994, Landis directed The Stupid starring Tom Arnold. It was panned by critics and was a box office failure. The 1990s were not as kind to Landis, and films were not doing well money-wise or critic-wise. He had fallen off hard. In 1998, Landis would reunite with longtime collaborator Dan Aykroyd to make a sequel to The Blues Brothers called Blues Brothers 2000. To replace John Belushi, they went with John Goodman. However, the movie was simply not what audiences were interested in 1998. It was a sequel to a movie almost 20 years old. It bombed hard at the box office. Landis and Aykroyd would collaborate again that same year with Susan's Plant. It was planned to be released in theaters, but after poor audience reception, it was instead released direct-to-video. Landis had officially hit rock bottom. He was one of the top directors in Hollywood, to now a director making flops. Landis would not direct another movie for 12 years. Between then, he directed numerous failed TV shows. His next movie would be in 2010 with Burke and Hare with Simon Pegg and Andy Serkis, but it continued the trend as it bombed at the box office. As of writing this, it is the last movie John Landis ever directed. Landis has not directed a movie since 2010. He has only made one movie since 1998. Landis has not been 100% out of the industry. He worked on the TV show Stan Lee's Superhero Kindergarten in 2021. Apart from that, Landis has been completely out of the industry. Landis was hurt by a sting of flops in the 1990s. Landis was known to be a difficult director to work with, as well as his involvement in the Twilight Zone accident. However, actors and crew in studio were willing to look past it since he had a good track record of making successful movies. When it all began to fall apart, they turned on him. Now Landis is on the outside looking in. It's how the industry works. Following the fatal accident of the film Rust gave more light into the Twilight Zone accident. It's unlikely that Landis will ever direct another film. He's been mostly forgotten. Like it or not, Landis was an influential director. Look at this scene from Spies Like Us.
The drive-in is closed.
We're with the Ace Tomato Company.
Those two guards in that scene were acclaimed directors Joel Cohen and Sam Raimi. Both credited Landis to their success. Landis even had a brief cameo in Spider-Man 2. One of the best things to come out of Landis was makeup artist Rick Baker, who would go on to have a legendary career that I've already mentioned. He's even passed on through generations. His son Max has worked as a screenwriter on different films, including directing the movie Me, Him, Her, and creating the brief TV show Dick Gentry, Hostilic Detective Agency. However, his career was halted after various women accused him of sexual assault. So who is John Landis? The question is hard. He was a movie director, a very successful one at first. He fell as quickly as he rose. The name John Landis probably means nothing to most people. He has not directed a movie in over a decade. His last successful movie was Coming to America in 1988. He was never nominated for an Oscar. So why am I making a video on this guy? When I was young, I enjoyed reading movie credits at the beginning of movies. It helped me become interested in movie making. I watched a lot of John Landis' movies at the same time. I became interested in who he was and did research on him. Seeing how successful he was at one point to now almost nobody, I was interested. I simply just wanted to tell this story. It's an interesting and complicated one. There's probably no right answer to this question. It's full of highs and lows, comedy and tragedy, and that's why I think it's worth telling. Alright, now, it's time to move on to the next project.